Good morning, everyone. So before we begin today, I'd just like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and that there is a privacy statement that was included in the invitation of this webinar. If you do not agree with the privacy statement or do not wish to participate in a recorded webinar, we ask that you please log off now. So moving forward, I would like to thank everyone for attending our webinar today on how to plan and launch a new website for your business. So this exciting initiative is in joint partnership with the City of Coquitlam and Webnames. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Webnames and their representative, Karthik Balajandar. Webnames is Canada's original domain name registrar and web host. Co-founded by the team that established the .ca domain for Canada, Webnames has supported small business and large business succeed online for over 20 years. So our presenter today, Karthik, is the marketing manager for Webnames. He is an engineer turned marketer who applies his analytical skills over the last 8 years of digital marketing experience to help customers choose the products and services that best work for them. As for myself, my name is Curtis Scott, and I'm the acting manager of Coquitlam's Economic Development Division. So through our pandemic, our division has been launching and running several initiatives, including this one, all under the efforts of supporting local businesses through this pandemic. These programs are under the city's broader community support and recovery plan, which this plan is multifaceted, but it's our main focus with it is to support the recovery and sort of resilience of Coquitlam's residents and business community. So if you'd like more information on this program, we will include some links at the end of the presentation, or you can check out coquitlam.ca/CSRP. I'm also joined by my colleague Daniel Donchev, Business Development Coordinator, who will be acting as moderator today and will be monitoring the chat for any questions that you may have. So before we start though, just a few housekeeping items. So this webinar should take no longer than an hour. We will leave some time at the end for question and answer, and it will be available later this week, a recording of this session on www.letstalkcoquitlam.ca/business. Again, these links will be provided at the end of the presentation. There will be an additional optional webinar on Thursday, November 26th at 4 p.m. That presentation will briefly review the content that we go over today, but the main focus will be on how to increase the web traffic to your website. As I mentioned, after Karthik's presentation and we conclude this session, we will pause the recording for participants to ask questions. And following the webinar today, we will send a follow-up email to everybody with the presentation slides and a link to that future webinar that I've mentioned. And finally, just as a quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded. All attendees will be muted during the presentation unless you click the raise hand icon to ask a question. If you need to, also you can ask questions in the chat as we've mentioned, and Daniel will be monitoring those. So at this time, we will hand the webinar over to Karthik from Webnames to begin his presentation. Karthik.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Curtis. Thank you, Daniel, and the team at the City of Coquitlam for having us. It's great to be here. So I'll just start off by maybe introducing what webnames.ca is all about. Can we switch to the next slide, please? Yeah, thanks. So as Curtis mentioned in our introduction, we are the first .ca domain registrar, and that's partly due to the fact that John Demko, one of our co-founders, was the one who set up the .ca domain extension from the campus of UBC more than 20 years ago. So we've worked with Canadian entrepreneurs and small businesses for 20 years now. In fact, just last month, we celebrated our 20th year. We offer more than 600 domain extensions like .com, .org, .ca, and so on. We provide web hosting, website builders, and a number of other tools that you can use to succeed online. We are 100% Canadian. All our data is stored within Canada. Our data centers and servers are located in Canada. And and we believe that the Canadian privacy laws and data protection laws are something extremely important to help small businesses defend themselves against like all the cybersecurity threats that exist. We're also a women-owned and women-led business. Sibel Negris is a CEO, pictured on this slide. So we're certified by WEB and Kamsky. And we like to brand ourselves as your ally on the web. And our staff has quite the reputation to provide some world-class support and make sure that your problems are solved rather than trying to resolve issues by keeping times as low as possible. Next slide, please. Yeah, so getting onto the topic of today's presentation, I'll be trying to run you through what steps there might be as you plan to launch your first website. And these are the broad 4 categories that we will be looking at. First thing is the research and how you can get the right domain name, secure your brand on the web. And what does that entail? Is it more than social media? Is it just a domain name? Is it the website? And how to do this research, especially when you cannot devote a lot of time to it? Because we understand that as small businesses, a website and building that should not take up a whole lot of your time, but it should not also be done in a fashion which might not serve the end goal. Following that, we will also be looking at how you put together a list of things that you need so that your website can actually deliver on the objectives that you have. And therefore, what does that translate to in terms of the scope of work? Is it something you can do on your own using a do-it-yourself website builder, or do you have to outsource to a web designer or developer? There are pros and cons to both sides, and that's something we will be taking a closer look at today. And finally, we will also leave you with a checklist of items to consider so that you can, when you start this project, you know where you stand and what's left. And of course, we'll touch upon security as well, because that's increasingly becoming a dimension of anything that we do online these days. Next slide, please. Yeah, so before we dive in, if you think that it might be too late to have a website, then that's not at all the case. Like over 50% of Canadian small and micro businesses still do not have a website. It's never too late, of course, but these are some stats from a survey that was released just this year, and it provides some interesting information about like how people got the websites that they have today. Like a good chunk of them built their own websites, which is testament to the fact that website builders have evolved and offer a lot of good options these days. But when you require some bespoke features, or you require you probably want to focus on your business and let someone who's a professional do it for you, then that's about 47% of small and micro businesses. And one other thing that stands out is 65% of respondents to the survey created their website within 6 months of launching their website, their business, which goes to show that digital and internet is increasingly just another channel, and it's not considered as a special thing that could come in later. Next slide, please. So the need for a website, like we've obviously had several folks ask us, do I really need a website? I'm just a one-person show, or maybe a really small business who operates predominantly offline through a storefront. And they also talk about how social media could be a replacement for a website. But the one key thing that makes the case for a website as compared to any social media profiles that you might have, whether it's a Facebook page or an Amazon store or your LinkedIn, if you are into services and as a professional consultant, all of these are platforms that are essentially walled gardens that are owned by these big tech companies. And I do not particularly have a strong stance on one way or the other and don't mean to vilify big tech. But the problem is in any of these platforms, you do not own the narrative. You do not own the brand of your small business or even your personal services consultancy, right? So a website can act as that hub, which is completely owned and controlled by you. The website is not going to replace the role played by social media pages or profiles, but it's going to act as the hub of everything that you, your brand, or you as an individual stand for. And therefore, it can act as a gateway to which you can redirect people depending on all the different types of hats you might wear. For instance, if you have a personal practice as well as you have a business or a couple of different businesses, then that website on your personal domain name could act as a gateway to these 2 or 3 different initiatives that you have going on. The other thing about the other advantage to having a website is that it immediately boosts credibility. And as the statistic I've quoted here suggests, a website increases the perception or improves the perception that a potential customer or a lead has of your business. And it provides a basis for growth and intel. For instance, if someone's looking up your business by name, then having a website adds to the overall profile that they see when they're seeing results on Google. This helps you with domain search authority. It helps you to track how many people are even looking for you on an every day or an every month basis. And it could also help you scale the business as things grow over time. Next slide, please. So let's get back to the very first pillar of the 4 that we saw at the beginning. So it's about first trying to find out what options are available in the market and what you could get in a website depending on which mode you choose to go with. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so here is a grid on that will help you plan how you can start thinking about your website. We broadly classify this as a sequential set of 4 steps. The first thing, of course, is why do you need the website? What do you want this website to do for you, right? And we call it the purpose. So it would obviously depend on what kind of products or services are you offering. It could be in the form of, say, if you have a nail salon, or if you have products that you sell off a storefront, or you want to try e-commerce. So that's going to be a narrowly defined purpose for your website. And once you know what you want your website to do for you, what do you expect your customers to do when they visit your website? Because that is going to help you define the goals that you want to track on your website. For instance, it could be generating leads who can potentially become customers, or it could be just building awareness. It could just be a brochure sort of a website where people visit you and maybe you have a phone number listed that people can then call you at, or just learn about your products because you make something that you're selling through distributors and other retail partners. Or it could be e-commerce in the form of real sales conversions, like several people have Shopify websites where they sell items that they make, or if it's handicrafts, it could be a platform like Etsy. And once you know these 2 factors, you also need to keep in mind who your audience for a website is. For instance, it could have several different layers. So there might be several different segments to your audience. You might have 30 to 40% of your customers might belong to a certain industry or a certain location. In your case, it's very likely to be the Tri-Cities area. And they might be of a certain demographic fit. For instance, it might be men above a certain age or of a certain educational level. So you as a business owner or a potential business owner already have a fair idea of who your customers are and where you can find them. And a buyer persona and audience research just helps you structure this whole process and try to paint a picture of the different kinds of potential customers you're likely to get. And therefore, it'll help you promote your website and write content for your audience in a way that it will be easily discoverable for them. So if once you know who your potential customers are, it will help you inform where you could potentially advertise, or it could help you create the right kind of social media posts or the right kind of blog articles, which people can then search on Google and therefore discover your website. And the final step, of course, is as you understand why your website's being built, what you want it to accomplish, and who it is for, you have to start diving into details on where to discover them. Can you find analytics like what is the size of this market? How many people in my audience live in the geographic area that I'm targeting? And what kind of content do they like? Who are my competitors on the web when I look for these terms on Google? And therefore, what kind of content are they creating and what can I learn from them potentially? So this would be the first step that gets you started on the path to building a successful website. Next slide, please. So the first step is building a website can take anywhere from as easy as 30 minutes once you know exactly what you're doing to several months, depending on the complexity of the website that you're trying to build. But the first step that we always recommend is get your identity sorted out right out the gate. So what does that mean? We're talking about domain names, we're talking about your social media accounts, and we're also talking about creating your own business email. I know that a lot of folks use email addresses either with their ISP like TELUS or Shaw, or they use email addresses on free providers like Gmail and Hotmail, etc. But when it comes to your business and when you want to present, take advantage of the credibility that a website and the domain name offer, we recommend that you use a business email solution, even if only as a forwarder, because that is an element of branding that shows up when you're sending emails to anyone or someone is emailing you. And to arrive at the right domain name for your business, it's obviously not going to be an easy decision if a number of you already have websites or already have a business that's already operational. I'm sure you spend a lot of time trying to think of a name that appealed to you and that you thought was a good fit for the audience you're trying to attract. So if that domain name as an exact match is not available, for instance, on .ca or on .com, then brainstorm names by adding other relevant keywords. For instance, in the example that you see here, fluidconsulting.ca is a good domain name if you are, for instance, into the consulting business. Fluid strategy may be slightly better, especially if that is your strong suit. But probably the best is fluid.ca simply because it's the shortest and easiest to remember. So the factors that you should prioritize when you're looking for a domain name and trying to shortlist what works best for you would be brevity and clarity as it relates to relevance and how easy is it for people to understand what you do by just looking at the name. And also keywords. Keywords are basically terms that people might search for on Google or another search engine to discover your website. So if you have a business that's operational today, how would you describe it to a person who's not your customer? Those might be sort of the list of keywords that we're referring to over here. So I've also linked a bunch of good articles on this slide deck, and this slide deck will be shared with you in a follow-up email. So you can visit some of these links and check out some resources which will help you dive deeper into each of the points that are laid out over here. The one thing to keep in mind with a domain name is get the best domain name that you can afford. Because the domain name is basically the foundation of your identity online. And while it's possible for a single business to register several different domain names, odds are that once you start using a domain name, that's kind of what most people are likely to use for the rest of your time online, unless you're like a really large business. A funny anecdote is like Facebook, when they first launched, they launched on thefacebook.com, and they dropped the prefix the after a few years because obviously that made it shorter and it was easier for people to remember. But that came at a price, and several domain names, especially on something known as the domain marketplace or aftermarket, could cost from a few hundreds to several thousands of dollars. But for most small businesses, it should be possible for you to find a good short domain name from a reputable registrar. Registrar is a company just like us, Webnames.ca. We are a domain registrar. And sign up for your social media accounts on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, depending on your function, of course. For instance, it might not necessarily make sense to have a LinkedIn page if, depending on the type of business you are in. So those are judgment calls you will need to take based on how your business is, who your audience is, etc. And as I already said, use a matching domain-based email address for all your business communications. So for instance, some of the screenshots you see over here, the Stewart Books, news@stewartbooks.net is obviously a lot more credible than maybe something at an ISP email address. Next slide, please. Yeah, so once you've settled on your domain name, that's like the foundation of your brand, but there's also a lot more to it. There is your visual identity, and what do you want people to think of when they think of your brand name? I'm sure you would put a lot of thought while deciding your brand name, but there are other markers that you can use to communicate that promise. It could be content that might go on your About Us page, something that you consider is a central philosophy to your business. It could be that you deliver unmatched customer support. It could be that your products perform better than pretty much anyone else in the competition. It could be that you just maintain relationships with your customers that practically nobody else can match. But all of us in business want our brands to stand for something that is really, really good or excellent. And your brand needs to stand for those values and communicate them in the form of all the collateral you create, be it content on your website, be it your tagline, or even in just the way you and your staff work. And therefore, that translates to identity in the form of the user experience you deliver. How easy is it for people to contact maybe your support team? And what do your visuals look like if, for instance, diversity or multilingualism is something that your audience requires, then that should be apparent in the kind of photographs that make up your website. And the option to have a multilingual website is something you should strongly consider. So one follows from the other, and this is just for you to jot down points on what you require your website to have in terms of features, in terms of languages, and because all of these will have technical implications in the kind of software you use or in the kind of content you build. Next slide, please. Can we switch to the next slide, please? Thanks. So this is just an example of some of the visual messaging that you can adopt. So the kind of attitude you want your brand to stand for will dictate the choice of even the fonts on your website. Is it meant to be classical? Is it meant to be more like digital and therefore futuristic? Or more flowery and more earthy. So these are choices that you will make based on your understanding of your audience and the kind of image you want to portray. Next slide, please. Yeah, so next we will move on to, now that you know enough about what you want from your website, we'll look at how you will actually get started on delivering and a strategy for making it all work. Next slide, please. Yeah. So on your website, once you know who you're building for and what kind of an attitude you want your website to portray, there are a few important core components of the website. For instance, marked on this screen grab on this slide. We should keep in mind that the purpose should dictate what it looks like. It's very easy to think about a design that looks really funky or very fun or just on trend, but it's not necessarily the right experience that your audience might want. Oftentimes, we've come across web design firms or template builders who tout a feature which looks great for a very specific purpose, but may not necessarily work for practically every application there is. So the primary focus should be empathy with your audience. Like, put yourselves in the shoes of your potential customers and think about what they expect to see when they land on your website and how they expect to navigate your website and accomplish whatever they were hoping to accomplish. It could be a purchase, it could be a contact form, but that should be the primary driver of how content and visuals and menus and links are all laid out on your website. So to start with, you can start off with a bare bones website where you have the basics, like maybe an About Us page, your homepage, and a contact form, a product listing page, and maybe a testimonials page. But as you observe behavior and as you learn more about your audience, you can add pages as you go. And focus on certain aspects of the website that are first visible when someone visits you. Basically, the first fold, like when you load up a website, the first screen that you see, we call that the first fold. And an empirical study suggests that over 40% of users who visit a website seldom go beyond that first fold. They probably just close the tab right there because they did not find what they were looking for, or the information was presented to them in a way that was not clear or concise. So it's important to make sure that your menu and the content on your first fold contain calls to action. That's the CTA that we mentioned over here. It provides links either to contact details or just a contact or a call button itself. And these days, most people, including you and me, browse all the time on our mobile phones. So it needs to be a responsive or a mobile-ready website. And the one other thing you need is an ability to track how many people visited your website, because that will help you iterate over time and improve the content and the user experience on your website. For instance, if you notice that the bounce rate or the number of people who visit your website and leave without taking any action, not even scrolling down on your homepage, this is data that is available on most popular analytics tools if you can install that on your website. And once you see such trends, it'll help you make changes so that you can influence users' behavior when they land on your website. The other factor to keep in mind is it's exciting to take on a project like launching a website, and it requires a fair amount of work. You might have put in a lot of money to the whole project, but you also need to keep in mind that building the website is just your first step. It's like pushing the boat out into water. But after that, to get to where you want to, you need to know how you're going to propel yourselves. You need to know where you want to head. And therefore, in the same analogy here, it translates to how frequently do you need to update your website, and who is going to do the updates. If it is if you or someone on your team has the technical wherewithal to be able to make these website changes, that's great. Or do you need a content management system, which even a non-tech savvy person can use? So these are all factors to keep in mind as you start to translate your vision for the website into something that's reality. Next slide, please. So as I said in the previous slide, we have a set of objectives, and we have those translate into features which deliver on those objectives. For instance, if you want your website to just be a forum for people to discuss on topics that you're passionate about, maybe it's hockey, then the kind of application would probably be like a web-based application, something like maybe a Reddit or any other consumer forum. But if you wanted to generate leads on a brochure-style website, you want your website to have a contact form or maybe a chat widget. Or if you wanted e-commerce and sales, then you need a cart functionality, you need a product listing functionality, and an account creation functionality. And if it's just for pure information, like downloading of a PDF or maybe a menu for a restaurant, then you just need pages, the ability to build pages on your website. So your goals ought to dictate the kind of features you're looking for and not the perceived coolness of the features themselves. Next slide, please. And one other aspect to keep in mind, and this is a topic we are going to talk about in the subsequent webinar, which is optional, but we're going to dive a lot deeper into the marketing building blocks. But your choice of a platform for building your first website needs to consider how easy is it going to be for you to use different marketing tactics to send traffic to that website. For instance, something that I would recommend very strongly, especially given that most of you are localized businesses operating in a defined geographic region, is a Google My Business account and a Google Search Console submission. So I'll go into a brief one-line description of each of these. The Google Search Console is basically a platform that Google offers for free, which lets you include your website on Google's tracking metrics, and it gives you information on what did people search for when they landed up on your website, if they did through Google, right? And it also helps you understand how much traffic you are attracting through Google searches alone, and how you might optimize it. Are there certain technical problems or issues that if you fixed, you might be able to get even more traffic through Google? And Google My Business is the widget that you see when you search for a business name on Google, where it shows the map and it shows reviews, and it allows you to update the timings that your business is operational for. It allows you to upload menus if you are in the food service business, and all such nifty factors. Now, it's completely possible for you to have a Google My Business entry even without having a website, but the Search Console and most of the other tools that I'm referring to here will be relevant, especially only when you have a website. The other part about marketing blocks is the kind of content you're going to write will dictate how frequently Google indexes your website, because Google frequently visits websites to check for new content on the website or on the blog in an effort to try and make its results more relevant. So the more content you have, the better and more relevant content you have for your audience, the more traffic you will be able to attract from Google. And one other factor that I would like to highlight, especially the small businesses, is a website for small businesses usually ends up being a project which after it's launched kind of goes on the back burner. But the simplest and most effective way to tie it in together with your day-to-day business operations is to make sure that your business cards, any of your brochures, and all the collateral that you have includes your URL. Treat your website like you would treat your office or your store. It's all got to be one single unified experience for your customers, and that's what will help one rub off on the other. And this goes to your social media accounts and your branded email as well, as we spoke about earlier. Some features that you might consider on your website, choice of website platform, are things like email marketing forms and potentially drip campaigns, which are basically automated emails that you can set up depending on users' behavior on your website. For instance, you might have seen that if perhaps while shopping on an Amazon, you left something in your cart, you get an email a few hours later saying, hey, you left something in your cart. So those are all automated and typically called drip campaigns. You might also, as you scale your business and you start getting more traffic to your website, consider integrating it with a customer relationship management tool, such as HubSpot, and try and run performance advertising on Google or Facebook or LinkedIn. So all of these will have implications for the kind of platform you choose for your website. Next slide, please. So that brings us, now that we have some technical requirements of what features we need on the website, it brings us to the question of, should we do it on our own, or should we go to a professional like a website designer or developer? And we'll give you a pros and cons approach for both of these choices. And there is really no one size fits all answer. It's possible for you to do well with both, depending on your unique context. Next slide, please. So it's a very common question. Website builders have come a long way since Weebly and the first wave of them came up more than a decade ago. And these days, it's quite easy for complete average Joe to build a pretty stunning looking website that does most of the things they want. So next slide, we will look at a number of things that you should consider as pros and cons for DIY website builders. So the first advantage is the website builder is reasonably affordable upfront because you don't really spend separately on hosting and then separately on a web designer or developer who is actually going to build that website for you. There are plenty of choices for website builders. There's Weebly, there's Squarespace, and might I say, we have two website builders that we at Webnames ourselves offer. And many website builders also include the domain and the email as part of their pricing. And it's technically feasible to launch your website depending on the amount of content you have in as little as a few hours or in a day. Whereas if you're looking to do e-commerce and sell a lot of products, that could take a while more. And as I said, practically anyone can launch a website using a website builder without much technical know-how. And there are templates that are available for various different use cases, the kinds of businesses, if you're a not-for-profit organization, or if you are in a very niche category, then that's possible. The advantage is also that because it's DIY model, you can maintain it by yourself, which might be a pro or a con, depending on the amount of time you have for this project. On the negatives, you have the total cost of ownership that I've abbreviated here as TCO. It's possible that a website builder option can cost you more as time passes, because the maintenance and the amount of time that goes into it could increase as the number of products you sell increase. And the sheer amount of choice that's available can be overwhelming, and choosing the right website builder for your unique circumstance can be tricky. That's why sometimes it might make sense to go a little for a professionals. The other flaw is its limited customizability. You have to stick within the templates that are available, and you are not able to customize it even if you want to hire a programmer at a later stage. Next slide, please. Yeah, and if you choose to go on your own, like through a website builder, then here's the cost estimate. It could be anywhere from $75 to $600. You have a bunch of optional extras, like for logo design, etc. And all these come at an additional fee. But your primary considerations should be who is going to be building this website, who is going to maintain it, and how much time can you afford to invest in it, and the total cost that you expect to spend on it. But the outcomes will depend on the content and the kind of research that goes, and not necessarily on the kind of website you're building. Next slide, please. So to choose a website builder, here's a checklist that kind of covers a number of different points. Like there's a free trial, the kind of security. It's about comparing your feature wish list against the features that each website builder offers. Here, there's a link on the left side of this slide, which has an incredibly long but super useful list of things to keep in mind as you evaluate a website builder, and I'd highly recommend that. Next slide, please. The do-it-yourself option can also be used with WordPress. Some of you might have heard of it. It's a content management system, but it's something that you can host on your own web hosting. So it's sort of a hybrid between a true website builder like Squarespace or Wix or Weebly and a pure developer-enabled platform. So at Webnames, we have a WordPress website builder, which is through a tool called BoldGrid. And we invite you to take a spin if this is something that catches your fancy. Next slide, please. Flipping to the other side of the coin, should you hire a website designer? We look at what the costs might be. Next slide, please. So a website designer, depending on the scope of work, could cost anywhere from $1,000 to $60,000. And there is also the maintenance cost, depending on amount of changes you have. But these are the factors you need to keep in mind, which will help you decide whether you should go with a website designer or for a website builder. The key fact is don't overcomplicate it when you're just getting started with your first website. But if you have very clear needs that require custom development, then this is obviously the choice to go with. Next slide, please. So here's the checklist that I promised off the top. So security, SSL certificates, we cannot recommend it highly enough. Like an SSL certificate is what gives you that padlock symbol when you're loading up a website on your address bar, on your browser's address bar. And what it does is it encrypts all the traffic between you and anyone who's visiting your website, and therefore helps protect their data and gives you that secure symbol. Matching email, we've already discussed that. I'm going to skip a few of these points here in the interest of time, but I'm happy to take on any questions that you have towards the end of this session. I've covered a number of these points already over the slides in the past, so happy to discuss in the Q&A section. Next slide, please. So taking a closer look at security, and this is for your website, but it's also for other things that might impact the security on your website. Enable two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication on your Webnames or any other registrar account and services. This is to protect your domain from being hijacked by someone else. Install an SSL certificate. Never reuse passwords if you can avoid it, and always use a password manager. I've recommended a couple of them here. And make sure that all the passwords that you use, even for things like your social media accounts, are distinct from each other, and they are all strong and long. Next slide, please. Yep, that brings us to the question and answer section. I think we can throw the floor open for anyone that might have questions, or we can take a look at what's on chat.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Karthik. This was a fantastic presentation, very comprehensive summary of everything that's involved with creating your brand and the considerations you need to have with creating a website and marketing. And I mean, I feel like we probably could have gone on for a lot longer, but that was fantastic. So I'd like to thank you again for going through this session, as well as for the participants for joining us. Really hope you have learned a lot about this. And as Karthik just mentioned, we will be going into a Q&A session that will not be recorded. So at this time, we will just be transitioning the forum over to the Q&A session and stopping the recording. Great, thank you again for the presentation and for everybody joining us. Here's just some additional resources that we wanted to include that I discussed at the introduction of this webinar. The City of Coquitlam Business Support Resource page at letstalkcoquitlam.ca/business does have a lot of links to a variety of initiatives and programs that we're running locally as well as provincially and federally. And as well, we'll be posting this live recording webinar on that site as well. And of course, we do have our tourism website, our Coquitlam Support and Recovery Plan, and just general COVID updates. So again, thank you very much. And here's our contact information should you have any follow-up questions. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar session, which is scheduled later this month. Thank you very much.